Monsignor Hector Aguirre, who used to be an auxiliary bishop when Pope Francis was in charge, is a special person in the church. He's one of the few church leaders who has been brave enough to openly say what he thinks about Pope Francis's direction, saying it's risky. After thinking for a long time, Aguirre has decided to speak publicly again. This time, he's talking about the new Pope, Leo XIV. What he says is really important and should be listened to carefully. In the Argentine church scene, which often showed support without really thinking, shaky faith, and a tendency to just wing it when it came to spiritual guidance, one person stood out. Even though he stayed quiet for a long time, he kept making those who paid close attention worried. Archbishop Hector Aguirre. A big name among Latin American priests and former Archbishop of La Plata, Aguirre has stood out over the years as one of the few bishops ready to speak his mind honestly. He went against the idea of everyone having to agree on how to guide people and the neutral language that has been used in church communication for a long time. When he decided to speak, he did it through a written piece that really made an impact in the church world. It's a text that's like a real complaint, and today it's worth looking at very carefully. At the heart of Monsignor Aguirre's reflections was the profound crisis facing the church during Pope Francis's pontificate, a crisis that for him went far beyond surface-level issues. His writings, composed while Bergoglio was still pope, delved deeply into the roots of the church's troubles, blending theology, culture, and history with a sense of urgency and sorrow. Aguirre's analysis was shaped by years of contemplation, observing the slow erosion of faith and tradition, especially in his native Argentina, a country outwardly Catholic yet inwardly struggling. He described a landscape marked by empty seminaries, abandoned religious institutions, and a dwindling presence of young people in the pews. In some dioceses there were more bishops than seminarians, and entire religious orders went a year without a single new member. For Aguirre, these were not isolated statistics, but symptoms of a deeper malaise, a church that, in his view, had chosen compromise over conviction. He argued that by prioritizing social trends over tradition and emotion over faith, the church risked losing its very soul. Aguirre's warning was clear: unless the church returned to its roots, truth, tradition, and authentic faith, the decline would only deepen, leaving future generations with little more than memories of what once was. The article at the time was met with a mix of awkward silence and irritation from many official circles, highlighting the drift that had become firmly established within the system. The strength of the text came from the fact that Aguirre wasn't speaking as an outsider, but as someone who lived inside the most affected reality. In Argentina, he wrote, not only had priestly vocations disappeared, but sacramental marriages had also become socially unimportant. The faithful had turned into cohabitants, partners, figures without a clear identity, as if the sacrament was now just an unnecessary extra. The church, now pushed to the sidelines in public discussions, was only mentioned in newspapers for supposed wrongdoings or for views considered old-fashioned by the media. With his usual clarity and calm, Aguirre shed light on something that today sounds like a funeral song. He spoke of the gradual abandonment of Catholic education, a process that unfolded quietly but with profound consequences for generations of faithful. The job of teaching Christians and spreading Catholic culture had been ignored and left behind. Schools that once echoed with prayers and hymns now stood silent, their mission forgotten. His thoughts weren't just his own, they were part of a bigger discussion about the path the Church took after the Second Vatican Council, when many hoped for renewal but found uncertainty instead. The Argentine bishop sadly recalled how, 60 years after that council ended, what was hoped to be a new spring had instead turned into a long, harsh, and confusing winter, leaving Catholic education adrift and many searching for direction. Pope Paul VI's words echoed strongly in his statements, resonating through the decades as a warning to the faithful and the hierarchy alike. Through some cracks, the smoke of Satan had crept into the temple of God, a metaphor for confusion, doubt, and spiritual crisis within the Church. Monsignor Aguirre brought up this statement again, seeing it as proof of a dramatic feeling that the Church was under siege from within, a spiritual battle not easily seen. This sense of crisis seemed to have reached its final peak under Pope Francis's time as Pope, as debates and divisions grew more visible. And yet, all of this was said back then with a rare freedom and bravery that only a few dared to show openly, echoing through the halls of the Church to this day. The election of Leo XIV was an event that even the biggest doubters agreed was profoundly significant. The anticipation in Rome was palpable as the world watched the ancient rituals unfold. The crowds in St. Peter's Square waited anxiously for the signal that would announce a new era for the church. The new pope was not yet well known to the public, but his first messages immediately stood out for their clear symbolic power and depth. Every gesture, every word seemed carefully chosen to signal continuity and strength. The choice of the name Leo was already a statement in itself. Like Leo XIII, the Pope of Rerum Novarum, who began the 20th century with a bold and distinct Catholic social teaching, Leo XIV signaled a return to those roots. The addition of 14th made it clear. This was a continuation of tradition, not a break from it. There was no out-of-place creativity, no flashy pastoral style, just a return to spiritual power, unafraid to reveal itself to the world. When the new pope appeared on the balcony dressed in traditional clothes, wearing the red mozzetta without taking it off, without making dramatic gestures or trying to please the crowd, many stayed silent, holding their breath. It seemed like a return to the past, yet it represented a different future. A future that spoke again through the voice of tradition, bringing back the values of truth and fairness, and that wasn't looking for the world's approval, but for its change of heart. Archbishop Hector Aguirre, who had already clearly pointed out the church's drift, commented significantly on this change. The presentation of Pope Leo XIV, he wrote, brings back more glorious times. It wasn't about missing the past, but about seeing things clearly. Glorious not because they were perfect, but because they were led by popes who weren't afraid of their mission. Glorious because they had a clear Catholic identity, even when things were tough. Aguirre's insights remind us that clarity and courage are essential for the Church's mission. In his first public statements, Leo XIV brought up the encyclical Humanae Vitae, firmly restating the meaning of marriage and family according to Church teaching. This act, in the eyes of the media and some parts of the Vatican, seemed like a challenge. But for those who, like Aguirre, had spoken out about the sacraments losing their meaning and marriage being made less special, those statements were a welcome relief, in a difficult time. Even without saying his name directly, the new pope clearly went against the way Pope Francis used to talk. Where before things weren't clear, Pope Leo XIV decided to focus on what the Church teaches. Where new ideas were praised, he chose to highlight what has always been there. Where getting everyone to agree was the goal, he stressed the Church's authority instead. But more than the content, the approach itself changed a lot. No jokes, no new modern words, and no political slogans. The voice of Leo XIV quickly stood out as that of a pope who sees himself as a guardian, not someone who brings new things. He knows he has a big responsibility, not just a personal plan. And in this, he seemed to show, without saying it, everything Aguirre had hoped for. A return to the basics, a new dedication of the papacy, a clear sign against that image of a bishop in white who talked to journalists and sociologists, but who often seemed far from the simple faith of ordinary people. The start of this papacy has, by contrast, shown everything that was hidden in past years, and Aguirre's text today shines not for nostalgia but for its vision. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.